Ark Survival Evolved is a game with a very steep learning curve, and it can be very difficult for beginners to actually start and make progress in the game. So in today's video, I am going to share with you 5 of the best beginner tames that you can tame in Ark. But just before we get into it, make sure to like and subscribe, as it really does help out the channel. In at number 5 is the Theory. Now this is a great creature that can be tamed earlier on in the game. Yes, you're not probably going to tame this in your first session, but this is great to have in about your first 6 to 12 hours of playing Ark. This thing is quite a long tame if you have default settings, but it isn't too bad if you have the right trap and you have a reasonable amount of trank darts and obviously a reasonable amount of food to tame this thing. At the stage that you'll tame this thing, you may have some other options, but I would probably go for Medjo berries. And if you're playing by yourself, make sure to put up your settings so your Ark progress is faster, as there's no point as a beginner to play at default settings. It is just going to give you a much worse time. But after you have tamed your Therizinosaurus, which is a very simple knockout tame, you can just put it in a 2x2 stone trap and then just shoot it with trank until it's knocked out. This thing will deal a lot of good damage and essentially is as good as any other Ark carnivore would be, except it can't heal as fast because it doesn't eat meat, it eats vegetables. Its saddle is unlocked in the late 60s, so that is a bit after beginner stages, but on your Ark travels you can still have it following and attacking for you. In at number 4 is the Allosaurus. Now you could tame a Carno as well, but an Allo is just a bit of a step up, and if you get a couple of these things, they have a lot more buffs than the Carno. If you are going to find yourself an Allosaurus, you are going to need to look in any mountainous region of pretty much any map. On the island, you'll find them all across the north zones of Ark, around the mountains and around the volcano. Usually these things do come in packs, which is why they're a bit harder to tame than a Carno, but if you have a reasonably good trap, you could even trap all 3 of them, because they usually come in packs of 3 at once, and then you could have yourself 3 Allosauruses, considering that you do have enough trank darts to actually do the job. Once you have got this thing tamed though, you do have an absolute wealth of abilities, and on top of that you're going to have a lot more if you have it in a pack, as you're going to get the pack bonus. So you'll get an alpha of the pack, and then just generally on top of all of that, your creatures will be buffed a lot more. Also, the Allo does a very reasonable amount of melee damage, and it can easily kill Gigas or Carcharodontosauruses if you do have a high enough level. A lower level is definitely fine in the beginning stages. About a level 10 or maybe a level 20 will be great for your first Allo tame, and you definitely won't be disappointed in it. Again, its saddle is unlocked at a later stage of the game. I think it's around level 40, maybe level 50, but you can still have it following after you and attacking the creatures that you need it to attack when you're doing a metal run up to the mountains. These things are just really good, and also they are very mobile, unlike a bigger creature like the Giga or a Rex. If you didn't know, Ark's Dino AI isn't great when they're following you, so creatures tend to get stuck in rocks and trees, but with the Allosaurus, I don't really get that much, as they just seem to be able to navigate everything properly and very well. Definitely worth it. In at number 3 is the Mantis. Now sadly, if you are on the island, you're not going to have access to this amazing creature, but if you are on Raasclark, which is also a free map, so this is not locked behind a paywall, you will be able to tame the wonderful Mantis. They do have a more or less difficult taming method because it does require a lot of resources, but the actual taming isn't too bad. You will either need deathworm horns or woolly rhino horns, some bug repellent, and a set of ghillie. But once you do have one of these things tamed, they are so good harvesters. Yes, they are great for dealing damage as well and being great for combat, but I would mainly use one of these things for harvesting, especially if you're taming a low level, as in combat they're not really going to stack up in the health department. But the main ability of a mantis is obviously that you can equip melee weapons into its hands. This thing is absolutely amazing for that, and on Raasclark I actually do use it quite a lot for harvesting sheep, which you use to get mutton to tame bigger carnivores on Ark. But another great use of the mantis which you can use is you can equip pickaxes or hatchets to its hands, meaning it is a great metal harvester, rock harvester, flint harvester, wood harvester, and thatch harvester. And if you equip some sickles onto this thing, it will be great for fiber. In at number 2 is the baryonyx. Now this is personally one of my favorite creatures in Ark because it is so versatile and so useful in so many different ways. If you didn't know how to tame this thing, it is a very basic knockout tame. Sadly, you'll have to go to the swamp to get this thing. The swamp is not a place you want to be for that long, so just be careful when you are taming one of these things. But also remember, it is only going to eat fish and not normal meat. Don't get this wrong, as you're just going to end up ruining the tame, and you'll spend hours wondering, why isn't this thing taming? And then you'll just end up getting it killed by a Sarco or a Capro or whatever egregious thing is lurking in the swamps. So make sure not to make that mistake. But once you do have one of these things tamed, these are great for cave runs and are used a lot for cave runs as well, and you can even use them for the underwater caves that you may find as well. And they also have a secret ability in the water which makes the water cave runs so much easier with these things. They have a tail spin ability which can stun creatures, and it can stun creatures up to the size of a megalodon, which is absolutely insane. But apart from caving, this creature is great as well. They are great travel mounts. They do have quite a lot of speed and agility. If you have one of these things following you once you've tamed it, they never really get stuck on anything, which is good, apart from like gigas and rexes, as I have previously mentioned. And also on top of that, they deal a very reasonable amount of damage, and if you level their health up a little bit, they actually have quite a good health stat as well. So if you want one, head straight to the swamp. And finally, in at number 1 is the Thyla. For all you Ark Island players, you'll be very happy to know that this creature does spawn on that map. And in fact, it spawns all over the redwoods biome on that map. In this case here, I'm showing you it on Raasclark, but any redwoods biome on any map will have Thylas. But just be careful, because the redwoods biome is really dangerous, quite like the swamp as well. But once you have got one of these things tamed, which isn't very difficult if you have a net gun, otherwise just use a very simple trap and just give it a few trank arrows, this thing will be a great tame, and it has so much mobility. This can climb up walls and vertical surfaces, which also makes it quite good for PvP if you are intending to do base raids, but also for PvE as well, as it is really good at traversing the map. Also, on top of all of this, this creature is equipped with so many abilities. The first being that it has a bleed ability, making creatures and even bosses so much easier to kill. As you can probably tell, this is great if you are facing large carnivores, as it really does give you the overall advantage. Just make sure that your Thyla does actually have enough health to fight the creatures though, especially for alphas. The top 10 best creatures to defeating an Ark boss. In at number 10 is the Wyvern. Now you may think I'm crazy because you know that you can't take flyers into boss fights, but there is one exception. On the map that the Wyverns released on, which is Scorched Earth if you didn't know, they are allowed into the Manticore boss fight, which is why they are on this list. Wyverns deal a very reasonable amount of damage and are very good fighting and combat creatures. Also, if you didn't know, the Manticore, which is the boss on Scorched Earth, has wings and it flies and it spends most of its time up in the air for the fight. So if you can fly and fight it in the air, that is a way to get it killed even faster. And the Manticore is used a lot for element farming, so there's a way you can farm and grind the Manticore even faster, giving you more and more element. Also, the Manticore in the later stages will spawn death worms and rock golems on the ground, so it is a good way to avoid those as well. The other method you would use for the Manticore is use mantises with pikes or swords, but that is a little bit less viable as the weapons do tend to break. The wyverns are a great shout for doing the Manticore. Sadly, you can't use it on any other boss, but if you're trying to defeat the Manticore, bring some wyverns, and I would really recommend bringing in a lightning wyvern, as the lightning wyverns, in my opinion, just deal the most damage and are just simply the most useful. Seriously, get a lightning wyvern. In at number 9 is the Aloe. Now this is a great shout if you struggle with taming Rexes, even though sometimes these things are a little bit harder to tame as they come in packs. But if you do tame a pack of these things, you're going to get a lot more benefit than taming a pack of Rexes, as they do have an alpha pack buff. The Allosaurus by itself really does pack a punch, and it can deal a lot of damage, and it will be able to kill pretty much anything you can face in Ark. Actually, if I tend to do the Overseer on the island, I will bring Alloes instead of Rexes, as they are smaller, and instead of Rexes, they don't really get stuck on everything. But the sad thing is, they don't really have the health of a Rex, but they do stand up in the damage department. And if you have a pack buff, sometimes you can have Alloes dealing even more damage than a Rex. But I would definitely recommend bringing a Rex to the fight of Genesis Part 1 instead of an Allo, as the Allos will simply get shredded as their health cannot keep up. But for most of the bosses on Ark's older maps, such as the Island, Ragnarok and the Center, these things will be able to get through any boss with a breeze, besides the dragon, as that does have an unfair buff against carnivores, so definitely bring a Theri for that. If you are on the island and you're thinking of bringing an Allo into a boss fight, I would only really fully recommend it for the Megapithecus. As for the Broodmother, it can be done much better with Megatheriums, as they have a buff against insects. And for the dragon, like I just mentioned, use a Theri, as carnivores will not fare well. I wouldn't even bring a Rex into the dragon fight. Use Theris, it is so much better. Overall, the Allo is a fantastic boss creature. I probably wouldn't choose it over the Rex if I was in the late game, but in the kind of mid-game stages of Ark, when you don't really have enough resources to tame a Rex, or enough resources to craft good enough saddles for all of your Rexes, an Allo is an absolutely amazing shout. In at number 8 is the Spino. Now there are definitely many great advantages for using a Spino in a boss arena, which I'll get onto in just a second, but there are also many disadvantages as well. Namely, its health is a lot lower than a Rex, so in some longer boss fights, the Spino simply isn't viable. I'm specifically looking at the Master Controller on Genesis Part 1. Definitely don't bring Spinos into that unless you have really highly mutated ones, and maybe if you're doing Gamma and Beta, Spinos will be fine, but against the Gigas and Reapers that you'll face at the end of the boss fight, they might not fare so well in the health department. But there is definitely one use case where I would really recommend using Spinos if you can't shell out for something like a Moser. For the Moder boss on Genesis Part 1, these things are absolutely amazing, as they have their hydration buff, giving them extra damage and damage reduction. And if you have like 10 of these against the Moder does not stand a chance against you, and considering it is a relatively short boss fight, your Spinos should survive as long as they have a reasonable amount of health. I'm looking about over 25,000 here. Also, Spinos are great for some of the older bosses on Ark, On the island, Spinos are a great shout for the Megapithecus. If you didn't know already, Syntac used his mutated Spinos to defeat the Megapithecus on the island, and I have definitely done it a few times as well, where I can't really shell out for a Rex due to resource limitations or just simply that I don't have any good enough Rexes. The only thing is, Spinos are a lot harder to find than a Rex on maps like the island, so sometimes they're not really viable. In at number 7 is the Megatherium. Now, I have talked about this a couple of times already in this video about this thing and defeating the Broodmother. This is the creature you definitely want to go for if you are defeating the Broodmother. This thing is absolutely insane at defeating this thing. If you have 10 of these things, you'll be able to shred through an alpha Broodmother in a matter of minutes. Obviously, make sure to bring a UT and a Daedon as well, so you can keep them healed and you can give them buffs on top of their already insane insect buff. Yes, if these things kill an insect, they will get an insane damage boost and even damage reduction from other things. And considering the Broodmother spawns a hell of a lot of spider minions to try and attack you, the Megatherium is just going to simply kill one of these things and get the insect buff, and then it is going to absolutely wipe out the Broodmother and also the minions as well, as they can be quite annoying sometimes. So it is really good when you can get a Megapithecus to absolutely shred through all of those minions and shred through the Broodmother. Yes, maybe for the Gamma and Beta Broodmothers, you're probably not going to need a Megatherium to easily secure yourself the win, but for the Alpha, it is definitely worth it to tame a few Megatheriums. In at number 6 is the Theri. Now, like the Megatherium, I have talked about this thing already a lot of times in this video, namely for defeating the dragon. Because if you didn't know, the dragon's fire breathing ability has a very unfair advantage against carnivores, so it is definitely not really viable to bring any kind of carnivore into the dragon boss fight. Again, maybe for Gamma and Beta, you could bring something like a Rex or maybe an Aloe into the fight, but for Alpha, you are definitely going to want to bring a Theri. Theris do insane amounts of damage and are great creatures just for killing bosses and getting the thing that you want to do done. But there is one major downside which I definitely do have to point out about using herbivores for combat. If you didn't know already, when you heal a carnivore, you just feed them meat and they heal up reasonably quickly. But with a Theri, berries aren't really going to do the job here, so you are going to need sweet vegetable cake. And if you didn't know, sweet vegetable cake is very expensive, so it is not really viable to heal these things, so make sure you have some high health. In at number 5 is the Giga. Now yes, like the Wyvern, you can't really take this into most standard boss arenas, as it will not allow you to take a creature of this immense power. But I'm really going to point out Extinction here, as these are one of the best Titan killers that you can possibly get. There is essentially no other creature, apart from another creature that is also on this list, that will kill Titans as efficiently and effectively as the Giga does. The Giga deals immense amounts of damage in also very high quantities. This thing can attack very quickly and also has a bleed ability on top of that, providing even more damage. And if you have a couple hundred of these things, or more realistically around 50, these things will absolutely slice through the Alpha King Titan, which is the final boss on Extinction. There is essentially no other creature that you can use for this. Rexes will simply just pale in comparison to what the Giga can do for the Titans. But also, like the theory, there is a major downside that has to be pointed out about the Giga as well. Because of its immense power, it has a rage meter, and if this thing fills up to 100%, it is going to kick you off of its back and kill you and go into an absolute rage craze. And you really do not want to lose your Gigas when you're in the middle of a final boss. In at number 4 is the Daedon. Now yes, these things aren't going to pack a punch in the fighting department, but they have a very different role in the boss arena. These things are going to heal the creatures that are attacking the boss. This has the ability, when meat is put into its inventory, to heal all creatures in the general vicinity of it. But just remember, this thing is going to plow through meat when you do this, so at least put 1,000, maybe 2,000, sometimes even up to 5 or 10,000 pieces of raw meat into this thing's inventory, because it is going to absolutely slam through all of this meat. Really, just don't use this for actually fighting the boss though. I want to make that clear, as it is simply just going to die instantly. This is supposed to be for healing creatures, not fighting the boss. I have made that mistake before when I looked at a previous boss guide. Don't do that. In at number 3 is the Carcharodontosaurus. Now this is the only creature that can really match the Giga in the boss fighting department, and it also has the benefit that it does not have that rage meter. This thing isn't going to kick you off once it has been dealt enough damage. These things are also quite a lot faster and more mobile than the Giga, and they have a very reasonable stamina stat, so they aren't going to run out of stamina mid-fight. And they also have an ability which the Giga doesn't have. Yes, when you start using one of these things, the Giga is going to be doing a lot more damage. But when you fill up the Carcharodontosaurus's blood meter, this thing is going to deal a lot more damage than the Giga, and sometimes up to 3 times the amount of damage than the Giga. Sadly, also like the Giga, these things can't be taken into your traditional Ark boss fight. On the islands, the Broodmother, the Megapithecus, and the Dragon will not allow the Carcharodontosaurus in, but this thing really shines on Extinction, as it is the best Titan killer in my opinion. Obviously, the Giga used to be the only creature that could do the job, but since this creature has come out, it has really taken the spot that the Giga once had. It hasn't fully taken it, people definitely still use Gigas, but for now, I would really recommend using one of these instead of a Giga. In at number 2 is the Yeti. Now this seems like it would be a creature that would deal a lot of damage in the boss fight. You'd have about like 20 of these, and then you'd send them in, and then they would kill whatever boss you are trying to defeat. That method can work, but that is not the main use of a Yeti in a traditional boss setting. Usually the Daedon will follow the Yeti, and the Daedon will obviously be healing the creatures that are actually attacking. But then if the Yeti isn't attacking the boss, then what is it actually going to do? Well, the Yeti has 2 special tricks up its sleeve. It can use a Fear Roar, which will debuff the creatures that it is attacking, or the creatures that you have tamed are attacking in the area. It also does have a Courage Roar, which is the main roar that you are going to be using in a boss fight scenario. This will buff your creatures and again debuff the enemy creatures. This means on top of loads of other buffs that you may have, such as pack buffs, and if you're using Megatheriums, that incredible insect killing buff. These things are going to supply an even bigger buff on top of that, making most bosses an absolute breeze. So for all traditional setting Ark boss fights, the Yeti is the way to go. Finally, in at number 1 is the Rex. Now I have talked a lot about this creature in this video, but it is time to finally tell you why this creature is so good for basically every single boss in Ark. besides some of the underwater ones and untraditional ones. Now, the reason why Rexes are so good for bosses isn't because they deal the most damage or because they have the most health. It is because they are the most balanced arc creatures that are really viable for a boss scenario. These things have great health, which the Spino and Aloe are lacking, but they still have a really reasonable amount of damage without being something like the Giga, where they're not even allowed into a boss arena. And their saddles are quite easy to get a hold of as well. Around the level that you are going to be doing bosses, you'll probably be around level 70, maybe level 80, and you will have the Rex saddle readily available to you. And also, if you do want to go the extra mile, you can always look in supply drops for the higher level saddles, which will give your Rexes more armor. But if you do level up more health in the first place, you should be fine overall. But just remember, really don't take this thing into the dragon boss fight. But anyway, that is going to be the end of today's video. I hope you enjoyed. If you didn't agree with this list, comment your top 10 below, and I will see you all later. Bye.